Welcome. Is that on? Yes, it is. Welcome to Hot Topics and a concert. Did you know you were getting a bonus here with the Booker High School Jazz Band? I am Roxie Jerde, and I am privileged to be the president and CEO of the Community Foundation of Sarasota County. And we are just delighted to partner with the Herald Tribune to have this Hot Topics. And as we thought about where to have it, we thought, well, it's about education and it's about early development. We have some rock star Aspen Institute Ascend Fellows here that you're here to learn a lot from. But we thought, wow, this would be a great environment to have all of us gather. So what I'm going to do now, though, is introduce Dr. Shelly, Rachel Shelly, the principal at Booker, and she is an amazing partner. We thank you for sharing your school with all of us and this great talent, so you can share more about this tremendous group here with all of us.
I would love to. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Rachel Shelly, and I am the proud principal of Booker High School, and you're probably wondering why she dressed like that. Well, let me tell you, today was absolutely amazing. Today we had our Renaissance celebration, and our Renaissance is a reward recognition program where we recognize our students with a grade point average of 3.0 or higher. Now we have a diversified population with 1,200 students, but I am so proud to say to you that 660 of them were recognized today. We also had a wonderful activity called Bingo, and due to some generous donors, we were able to give away cash prizes that went from $5 to the winning $100, and it was a full bingo game. The kids absolutely loved it. At Booker High School, we are a fully diversified campus, and our demographics is also truly unique. We're the only high school with 1/3 African American, 1/3 Caucasian, and 1/3 Hispanic. We also have about 70, absolutely, we have about 70% of our students that's deemed economically deprived. But we are so excited about the progress that our students are currently making. Our graduation rate is increasing, and we have one primary goal, and that is that 100% of Booker High School students will graduate college or career ready, and watch this, and become productive members of our society. They know it by memory, absolutely. They know it. And with that, what we do is we want to make sure that they graduate and they're ready to enter the workforce immediately upon graduation and will make above minimum wage, or they will go into a college, university, or conservatory and be prepared to be successful. So we do a lot of unique things, and I'm so happy to have the Community Foundation as a partner, because when we talk about resources and things that are unique to Booker High School to help us with our unmet needs, I am always grateful to speak to them, and most of the time they say yes. Every now and then I get a no, but sometimes we're really excited about that. Here before you, we have one of our unique programs. We are a visual performing arts program, and we're known throughout the world. We also have two other magnet programs. We have a law academy, and if you haven't heard about Booker High School's Law Academy, I encourage you to get to know our Law Academy. Everything is on our website. Would you believe me if I told you that we are the only high school with our very own courtroom? Well, we have one, and it's amazing. And the third program is our University of Cambridge program called ACE, which is Advanced International Certificate of Education. There are some members in the audience that graduated from Booker High School previously. But now, you can not only graduate with a regular high school diploma, but with an academically rigorous diploma called ACE, and you receive the highest bright future. But you didn't come to hear about Booker High School, of course. You came to learn about and hear more about hot topics. Here before you, you have members of our VPA Jazz Band, and they're under the leadership of our wonderful Ryan Gantz. They will give you one more song, and then I will turn it over. I am always here for tours. If you're interested in touring this wonderful $58 million facility, just let me know. I'll be more than happy to share information about our school, but more importantly, you can see the positive culture and climate that we have here on our campus. Again, welcome to Booker High School on behalf of my staff and students, and also our district staff that's in the audience as well. Thank you and welcome.
At this point in the program, I would normally be introducing Tom Tryon, who would be moderating today. Tom had a death in his family this morning, right before the session, so they needed someone to fill in, and most of you who I asked said no. So I will be your moderator for today's session. If we would ask the fellows to join us on stage, I'm going to shift from this microphone to the official moderator microphone in just a second. Cedric, I was going to actually have you do some spoken word while we were in the middle. Maybe not this time, or you have something ready? Come on up, Ced. Yeah. Cedric's with Visible Men Academy in Bradenton, a great 2-gen school out there that we're really proud to support. This is Cedric owes me a video, I think, or something, so this is the punishment for not having my video done just yet. I don't know if the mic will move or if you need the mic. Come right up over here.
It's like I lost a bet, like the Patriots are going to lose or something. All right. You have a topic in mind, or you want me just?
What's a good topic for it? He just makes things up, so what's a topic? Reading.
Who said that? Brave person in the audience. Who said reading? I heard it from, it was her?
Josephine, yeah.
Reading about what? I'll take something else with that. Reading in, what was that?
Babies.
Did you say reading in babies? Sure. Let's throw something in there with reading in babies and something else. Okay, that's too much. Reading babies, I heard 3rd grade, and that's way too much. So, moms reading babies in 3rd grade. That's what you said? Somebody said no. Well, let's see if it does. Are you ready? Let's take this trip together and see where we end up, all right? I'm nervous too. Some say that if you take time and spend that time watering your seed, that you will get that harvest that you always dreamed of. Well, that's true, because when I was in 3rd grade, my mom used to read to me all the time, and since I was a baby, she gave me a gift, and that gift was words. Those words could get me out of trouble, those words could get me in trouble, but those words could ultimately save a life. And it's when I realized that giving those words back to a seed could also revive yours that I take that trip every day that I walk into a classroom. I see seeds that are waiting to experience their own voice and give that to a world in need. And if we can give that to so many kids and teach them how to read, by 3rd grade, they'd be, well, who knows? Geniuses. Maybe they could help the world turn in a whole different direction that'll cure all this immoral infection. And this is what we need in order to provide the ultimate protection for our dreams, and that's watering these seeds with reading and words and helping them understand the power and beauty that they all possess. And I must confess, I didn't always love reading, but I always knew I had something to say. And when I realized that I could put my emotions in these words together, then I could mold everything I see in this world like clay. So if you have a child, if you don't, go find one and give them words, give them your drive, and make sure when you read, you convey that same love through your eyes. Thank you very much.
Okay, we can all leave now, I think. That's pretty much, you guys all right?
Yeah.
Tepesh, you want to do a little bit of that?
I thought you were next.
No, I'm not going to be next. Actually, Visible Men Academy, one more time, Cedric, and there's some other people from VMA out here. Thank you. And I swear to you, we did not plan that. That was just off the cuff, and Cedric is incredible like that. We had Cedric do that once at our foundation with, I think there were 4 boys or 3 boys that did it, and the boys actually read something that they wrote, and it was so emotional. There were people bawling their eyes out to watch that happen. So thank you again for doing that. So I am not Tom Tryon. I am John Annis with the Community Foundation of Sarasota County. I did work at the Herald Tribune for a while, so I'm almost like Tom Tryon, except for the hair and the makeup that Tom would probably have on at this point because of the lights. Today, we are fortunate to have 3 of my fellows from the Aspen Institute, Ann Mosley was with us earlier today, who actually runs Ascend at the Aspen Institute, and Ann had to rush back to get to DC to, I'm sure, solve some huge word problem. Today, we've had, last night and today, have been out and about in the community talking about this two-generation approach. And how many people were at our two-gen summit in February last year? All right, a great portion. Just a quick review. The two-gen approach involves 4 pieces: economic supports, educational opportunity, social capital, and health and well-being. So if you think of those 4 components, that's the two-gen approach. What we've been talking about, Roxie and I and our board, for the last 5 or 6 years since we were introduced to the two-gen approach, was how do we bring that work to Sarasota with many of you, our partners that are doing this work in the community, to think about the work looking through a two-gen lens. Our two-gen summit last year, I think, was a huge success. Where's Kirsten Russell, who has made that last year and this year thing success? She's the detail person who makes things happen. I come up with these great ideas, and people just shake their heads like, what in the world are you thinking? It's not going to happen. Last year, we had 3 incredible fellows. Dr. William Serrata from El Paso Community College in Texas. So it's clearly higher education. And then we had Aisha Neandro from Springboard to Opportunity that is focused on resident-driven housing. She was incredible. And then we had Ann Silverberg, who's from Utah, who actually runs Health and Human Services for the state of Utah. Thank you for those of you that filled out the surveys. Some of the feedback we got is that there wasn't a common theme. Right? There wasn't an area. It was so much. There's so many good things to be covered in that space. And our idea was introduce you to the two-gen. This time, we were very deliberate on who we invited back. First, it was people that would come and not have to pay them. So that first. I had to make sure that happened. But then it was, we really want to focus on early education. As we know, and you've all been reading in the paper, that an investment in that early education brings back much better returns. So on behalf of our donors and taxpayers, right, we should be spending more money in those early years. We've had some great meetings today and yesterday to talk about that. But the experts we have today, did anybody not get their bios? One person did not get their bios. She did get it? Okay. Other than her, everyone else got the bios, which she did. I'm not going to spend, we talked about this earlier too, not going to spend a lot of time on their bios. They are all super impressive, and go back and read their bios if they didn't. We're going to talk about their work, and they're going to do most of the talking, and I am going to again watch in awe of this group of fellows that I get a chance to spend so much time with over the last 2 years. 7 of the fellows have been to Sarasota. There were 21 of us total, and I think there are plans, if Roxie approves it, for us to bring every one of them back here so we can learn and share with them. They have all said they've learned things when they come to visit Sarasota, and we have certainly learned things from them. So we have not rehearsed this part either. We will not do this in spoken word. We'll just start out with going through, and we'll just go with maybe Depeche first. Talk a little bit about your work that you do every day, the two-gen components of it, and what you're most excited about.
Great, thank you. Hi everyone, thank you for having me here in your community. It's my first time in Sarasota, and it's really been a delight to be here. I'm a primary care pediatrician. I practice in Madison, Wisconsin at a federally qualified health center. I spend about 40% of my time doing good old primary care, what you'd expect. The rest of my time is spent doing a variety of work around education, training, and advocacy, primarily around the whole concept of early brain and child development. And specifically, I work with a program called Reach Out and Read, which I'm not smart enough to have thought of. It predates me by quite a few years. But I'm the medical director of Reach Out and Read in the state of Wisconsin and also serve on their national board. What we do through Reach Out and Read is we take the regular checkup that so many people are used to, bringing their child to the doctor's office and, immunizations and talking about, sleep and diet and all those sorts of things. And we add in a message there about literacy. And we actually use that literacy message to really be a springboard to all sorts of other things. We get to talk about sleep. We get to talk about screen usage and digital media. We get to talk about really parenting and about brain development from the earliest days. So what this is, everyone thinks about Reach Out and Read as being about the book, right? We actually give a book to the family. The healthcare provider walks in with the book in their hand and gives it directly to the child. And we watch what they're doing with it. It gives us a way to assess their development and so on, and to see what the parents' reactions are and all. But it also gives us a chance to do something absolutely critical, which is to build skills in the parent. Because it's easy for us to say, read to your child, talk to your child, sing to your child, all those things. And people hear that. People hear that across the socioeconomic spectrum. They're seeing the billboards, they're seeing the ads, they're seeing all these things. But really, the hard part is, how do I do that well as a parent? How do I do this right? Because you start wondering, am I saying things the right way? Am I doing this correctly? Am I the right person to do this if I myself don't have a great educational attainment or something like that? So to reach out and read, it really gives me that opportunity to be able to connect with, it gives...
Pay no attention.
Okay. With Reach Out and Read, it does give me that opportunity to connect. Should I start over?
No.
Yeah, okay. John, you planned this, didn't you?
Yeah,
okay.
Just for you.
Yeah. With Reach Out and Read, it gives me this opportunity to be able to connect with families, with parents, and to actually briefly model how to do that back and forth reading, that back and forth interactivity, and so on, and to encourage, to coach, and to really move on. And I can do this in just a couple of minutes in the context of a busy visit. And what we see is that parents get it and they understand. Because again, what we're seeing is not so much of an information gap, what we're seeing is a skills gap, right? They know this and they want to do this. That's the thing, parents really want to be good parents. Yes, I completely agree, yes. So what we're really aiming is how can we build these skills further in parents that are with young children? Because the thing is, learning doesn't start at kindergarten, it really starts the moment a child is born. So whatever we can do to build that good brain circuitry is really absolutely critical because it's going to pay off for us in the long run. And as was said earlier and was said really so beautifully, there's so much lost potential in our society. We don't know who would have created the next great innovation because they're lost. You know, there's too many emotional, behavioral, learning problems clouding these wonderful intellects. I don't want those intellects to be lost to all of us and the benefits that they have. So that's a brief overview of the work I do.
Depesh, could you keep the mic and just could you talk a little bit about what you did today, what your experience like today was in our community?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I started off rather early this morning and really visited a number of places in this area. We went to several pediatric offices in Sarasota and Manatee counties. And really, that was really heartening because here's the thing, many of your healthcare providers already know about programs like Reach Out and Read. They understand it. I'm not having to sell them on it. They actually get it. The concern, I think, for them is they don't have enough books coming in. Finding funding for this is tricky and difficult in the context of being a busy healthcare practitioner. I did fundraising for my own clinics for quite a few years, and I know how difficult it is. So to have the community foundations and so many folks interested in this is actually critical because that potential's there. We just need to tap it and really let it come out in its full form. I had a great meeting at the Manatee Community Foundation, and people had fantastic questions, really about how can we push this further. The key here, what I'm hearing from folks is how do we invest in the infrastructure of the early brain, right? It's not just about bridges and roads and tunnels and all. How do we invest in that as an important part of economic and community development? Because these are your future citizens. These are your future consumers. These are your future creators, your innovators, and so on. We need to invest in that brain infrastructure the same way we would any aspect of physical infrastructure as well. That's just as important to all of our well-being.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thank you.
Not the same level of response, the clapping that Sed got, but not bad. So we'll just kind of see how. Darius, if you would do kind of the same about your work, why you were here, kind of some of the research that you've conducted, and you know what to do from there. Same things we've been doing, just with a larger group.
Thanks, John. So I'm Darius Tandon. I'm a faculty member in the School of Medicine at Northwestern University in Chicago. I'm trained as a psychologist. As I said at the donor lunch before this, I'm trained as a community psychologist, and if you haven't heard what a community psychologist is, that's fine. There aren't that many of us. The way that I like to describe us is that we're really focused on prevention and we're interested in community-level interventions. So I have a lot of clinical psychology colleagues who really focus on treatment of mental disorders, and my focus is really on prevention and promotion of positive mental health. So a little bit about what I do and the trajectory of my work that has got me to this stage in Sarasota today. Prior to being at Northwestern, I was on the faculty at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and my very first job there was to work on a large project looking at the quality of home visiting services in the city of Baltimore. And for those of you who are not familiar with home visiting services are provided primarily to pregnant women and women with young children for a period of time. And really the idea is to try to provide different types of supports, resources, services to promote healthy birth, prevent child abuse and neglect, promote readiness for school. There are a lot of home visiting experts in the audience right now who could probably do a more thorough description than me, but that's the very, very short synopsis. And one of the things that we noticed as we started doing our work is that home visiting programs do many things very, very well. But there are some areas where home visiting programs could probably use additional supports. And as a psychologist, one of those areas that we felt we could be supportive of home visiting programs with is around the area of maternal depression. And we have developed an intervention that we, over the last few years, have been integrating or embedding into home visiting programs throughout the country. And the idea with this is really to try to bring mental health services to where people are. So, for those of you in the audience, you will probably nod your head when I say, you can make a referral and have somebody go and try to seek mental health services in a community mental health center or a primary care provider, but that is not always the most effective way of getting somebody the mental health services that they need. And really what we are trying to do with our intervention, which is called Mothers and Babies, is to bring this mental health intervention into the home visiting setting. And so what we have done over the last few years has been to develop initially a group-based intervention, and now we've turned it into an individual or a one-on-one modality where initially it was clinicians, mental health professionals delivering the intervention, and over the last few years we're really gravitating towards having home visiting staff, care coordinators, home visitors, be the ones that we are training to deliver this intervention to clients that are being seen in their home visiting program. We have a lot of evidence that this intervention works in terms of preventing new cases of clinical depression, in terms of helping mood regulation, in terms of increasing social support of clients. And what we are doing now throughout the state of Florida with some funding from the Florida Department of Health as well as the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is to actually bring our Mothers and Babies intervention to all 32 Healthy Start coalitions throughout the state of Florida. Yeah, don't clap yet. We haven't rolled it out quite yet, but the plans are there. So I appreciate the applause for the plans. It is exciting, though. It is exciting to think about the rollout of Mothers and Babies throughout the state. And really what we are planning to do over the next few months is, I've been here in the state of Florida a couple times already, and we'll be descending upon Florida a couple more times. And we are training clinicians and program directors from Healthy Start sites who will then be training their care coordinators to deliver our intervention. And over the course of the next few weeks and months, we will have trained all of the clinicians and program directors who will then be able to go out and train home visitors. So hopefully by summertime, we will be rolling out the intervention throughout the state of Florida. The last thing that I'll say, and then I'll pass the mic to Sarah, home visiting is definitely one setting, one context where this intervention, Mothers and Babies, could work. But there are clearly other settings where pregnant women, women with young children are seeking services. WIC clinics, prenatal care clinics, pediatric primary care. We've done Mothers and Babies in NICU units in Baltimore and in Chicago. So one of the things that I would encourage us to think about is, beyond home visiting, are there other places where we can bring interventions? And it doesn't necessarily need to be our intervention, but interventions like ours to really, again, sort of embed mental health services into these non-mental health settings where we think that there's going to be greater uptake.
Great, thank you. So Sarah and I were talking about this before this, is we were going to let the two boys go first because they both have programs that they're actually talking about. Sarah's research has been fascinating to me. This is more about, I'd like Sarah to start with the work that you've been doing and maybe how it ties into not only 2Gen, but the work that the boys are doing.
I'm here to legitimize the boys. So the work that we do, I'm part of a large group of researchers who have been working to understand how adversity changes the brain and body and result in lifelong consequences for health, for achievement, for relationships. More recently in my research group, we have shifted our focus to try to understand how protective factors become biologically embedded. So if you have a very strong bond with a caregiver, how does that change your brain and body in ways that support you when you face other challenges down the road? So that's our new focus. And then in collaboration with my colleagues who are neuroscientists, we are also looking at the many ways that mom and dad change when they become new parents. And you may not have heard of this, but the brain becomes structurally and functionally reorganized during the transition to parenting. And that, it's really quite a massive set of changes that happen, and they're very important. When they happen, they support positive caregiving and positive views of new babies. And so in very recent work, we're trying to look at how interventions, like the type that the boys have been presenting here, might change behavior, and when they change behavior, is that also changing biology? Because we know that when we change biology and behavior, we have more sustained impacts than when we only change behavior. So in terms of what I think is particularly relevant about the two programs that they have described, I think everyone has gotten the message that early is important. I think we have done a really good job of penetrating our whole fabric of our society. People know they should read to babies. They know that the early years are really important. I think we focused on that so much that we missed a couple of things that they've highlighted. One is that it's not the book, it's not actually the reading itself that is so powerful. What is so powerful is the relationship. So what Depeche described is really supporting the parent in the skills and the belief that they can be this child's first and most important teacher. So I think that's a really key aspect. And then another really dramatic finding is the long and pervasive impact of maternal depression. So Darius's work really targets something we know what to do about. We know how to help people who are struggling with depression. And it is very, very, very common in the postnatal period. So something like what Darius is doing is bringing this non-stigmatized, he actually calls it stress management tools, non-stigmatized set of tools that really could help everyone delivered. And then I think the other thing that they share is that their programs are delivered by trusted relationships. So back to how important relationships are. They're delivered by your pediatrician, who you are telling about your sleep troubles and your breastfeeding troubles and all of this personal information. Is also saying to you, hey, you know what else is really important? The time you spend on the floor interacting with your baby. And home visitors build this trusted relationship. Early education sites are another place where families are coming to you for something that they need, and it's a place then where you can build on that trusting relationship to provide additional resources.
So Dr. Washington Hill was at a session with us this morning, and I think he asked a great question that the audience enjoyed about the impact of racism and discrimination on the mom or the child or in your research.
Sure. So the question was, how does racism play into this, this whole equation? And the answer that I offered is that we do know a fair amount about what are called microaggressions. We know a fair amount about the effect of discrimination on health. It's very impactful. It turns out, though, that the very overt discrimination that is sometimes experienced where someone behaves in an overtly racist way is actually less damaging for health, because you can sort of say, well, that person is out of line, or you might say that's not acceptable behavior, or there's laws in place. It's the subtle, all day long sort of constant undermining that is really damaging for health. And that happens to all visible minorities, depending on, from many different ways that you might categorize someone as having a minority status. And that is quite damaging to health. So it impacts things like resting blood pressure, stress hormone levels, and across time, across the lifespan, that can really take a toll on chronic conditions and health in general. So that was what he was wondering about. And so certainly, something like stress management techniques could help intervene when it isn't going to be always possible to react to every single subtle microaggression. It might be possible to have a daily routine of self-care that interrupts the effects of those microaggressions on your health.
Great. And one more, how are you measuring this? I think that was a great question, as most of us that aren't researchers or scientists,
sure.
How do you know that this is happening in the brain?
Mm-hmm. So you may have had an MRI to look at your knee or something like that, shoulder. So that same technology, that same magnet is used to look at how the brain functions. So whenever you see those pretty pictures of brains in the newspaper or wherever you might come across them, that's how they do it. So it's basically a big magnet. It's calibrated to be very sensitive, to be able to tell when blood flow changes happen in the brain, where they happen. And so we just look to see where those blood flow changes happen across time by showing people different kinds of things. So in the work that shows that parents become very responsive to their own baby, what they do is they show, have parents listen to an audio file of their own baby crying or another baby crying, and look to see how much more responsive their brain is to their own baby versus another baby. Or look at a picture of their own baby or another baby. So you're really looking at those differences, and they're tiny, but you're able to project those and connect that to other things. So a greater reactivity, if we put our mom here in the magnet, I'm gonna guess she's gonna have a big reaction to her baby's cry over another. I've been watching her parent for about a half an hour. She's probably have a big response to her own baby's cry versus another baby cry, and that is connected to how responsively she parents that child. So.
We'll go back to the boys in a second, but one more question from this morning that was fascinating to me was the immigrant population that you've been studying and how this relates to the immigrant population.
Sure. So I've been, like I mentioned, increasingly interested in protective factors. How do people do this well? How can we understand how that works? Because when you design an intervention, you're trying to intercept a negative thing, but you're doing it by promoting a positive thing. So could we promote positive things that we know have biologic consequences? So what we have been working with a population, about 70% immigrant families from Mexico, and while at the same time that we're documenting really significant adversities, I mean, trauma, exposure, gang violence, trauma during the migration process, discrimination post-migration, annual incomes of $6,000. I mean, really, really severe stress profiles. We're also seeing really pretty protective parenting behaviors in many of, not all, but many of the families. And so we've been trying to figure out how are they doing that? How are they doing that? I mean, it goes against much of the literature. And so we've been trying to document, asking them, and also developing measures to document things like hope for the future, right? This is really bad, and I knew it was gonna be really bad, but I have hope that my child's gonna have a better outcome. Or all kinds of protective factors like tight family relationships, other kinds of things like that. So we're gonna put them in the scanner, that's our plan, and try to get these resilient brains, get a picture of them so we can see, I assume that they will show effects of all the adversity that they have experienced, but how are they able to sort of overcome that and do these really difficult but so critically important parenting behaviors of being warm and responsive to their infants.
Beautiful. Dipesh, could you talk a little bit about your work? And in fact, I carry one around with me where you actually give out prescriptions to families. Talk a little bit about the prescription.
Sure. The prescription to read, which actually I have more. So, the prescription, I think, is something that people know about, right? They think about this when they go to the doctor's office. They realize that this is something that they should be following the instructions, and it's being given to you for good purpose. Well, we've used that to say there should be a prescription to reading. The origins of this is lost in the mists of time. I don't know who originated it. It wasn't me. But I've tried to repopularize it, particularly with Reach Out and Read. And what it says on it is, it's a standard prescription format, but it says that you should share books together, and it gives a few check boxes every night at bedtime for blank minutes every day, and we fill in the blank or as needed. And then it says refills, as requested at the local public library. So this is really important, though, because I think it makes concrete that this isn't just another piece of advice, that I really would like you to do this. And that's why we mean it. We mean it to the extent that we're taking the trouble to obtain books, give your child a book, talk to you about reading, and then give you this. Because I want you to follow this the same way as if I gave you an antibiotic prescription or anything else, and to really follow through with it. The other thing is it's also really helpful as a reminder. It's also really useful when talking to other folks. I've used this in advocacy with policymakers and others, and they remember this, right? They remember this, that as Sarah mentioned, we're delivering this model, this program, through trusted messengers, right? I realize I'm not under any illusions that, people do everything I say, but I do believe that they at least would like to do most of what I discuss and talk about in the advice that I give. So what we're doing is saying, look, someone you already trust with so many aspects of your child's life and health and well-being, we're giving you this advice at the same time, and it really puts it into that context. The other thing I point out is this is probably, and I really do mean this is probably the most important prescription that I will ever hand a family. More so than an antibiotic or even most other chronic medications and so on. Because if you ask what is the single most important factor for lifelong well-being and health, it's actually not diet and exercise. Those are important, don't get me wrong, but the most important factor is actually education. Because if you can successfully thrive in school and have a good education, you'll have a good career. And when you have a good career, you have resources. And when you have resources, you can do all sorts of other things. If you don't have resources, a lot of doors are closed to you. They just don't become practical or attainable. So all these things we talk about in terms of health and well-being, you need to have a good education backing that up. And that is the single biggest factor that will really play out across the decades. That one ear infection, it'll be fine, it'll be over in a little bit. In fact, we often don't even prescribe antibiotics for some kids anymore in certain circumstances for ear infections because most of them will actually be self-limited. But reading, success in school, education, those impacts really ripple across the decades and across entire lifetimes.
So I just want to make a point building on what Dipesh said and trying to sort of build some synergies across our work. So, I wholeheartedly agree with what Dipesh just said. And thinking about some of the intervention work that we do. If you looked at our manuals that we are asking our instructors to use to deliver our intervention, if you look at the first couple sessions, it's around doing pleasant activities as a way to improve your mood. So we talk about some of those pleasant activities might be things that you would do by yourself, but we also really encourage, parents to think about pleasant activities that they can do with their child or their children. And reading is one of the examples that we give, right? Reading is something that's easy to do. It's also something that, generally speaking, is no cost or low cost. It's something you can do in very brief intervals, even if you have a lot going on in your life. So, I'm just trying to show that there's, synergies across the work that we're doing. And again, just to reiterate, Dipesh's point about the importance of what he's doing.
Keep the mic there. So, in the work that you do, as you design this program, give me an idea. So I'm the parent that's being visited. I'm having my home visit. What is happening for those of us that aren't experts in home visitation? What happens during a home visit in your world, the way that it's going to work well? What kind of things are happening during that visit?
So in terms of what happens during a home visit, again, I feel like I'm like looking at the Healthy Start Coalition folks. You should be answering the question in terms of what happens during the home visit. But, you know, generally speaking, and you can just yell and like catch it, you know, generally speaking, I mean, there are a lot of things that happen, you know, during the course of a home visit. And I think, you know, there's a focus on promoting knowledge around child development. There's a focus on trying to meet, you know, the varied needs of, you know, clients. So some of it might be very sort of tangible needs. You know, we need help with formula, with diapers. It may be emotional support that's needed by a client. You know, there's a focus on linkage with different types of services that a client may need. It may be linkage with a prenatal care provider if that prenatal care provider is not in the client's life already. It might be linkage with a pediatric care provider after the baby is born. You know, and, you know, get into what we're trying to do with our work. You know, what we are saying is, you know, during the course of a regular home visit, which may last 40, 45, 60 minutes, you know, there's a way that we can add on a few more minutes to a regularly scheduled home visit that is specifically focused on our sort of stress management intervention. And that's really the model that we're using. You know, our one-on-one version of mothers and babies are 15 to 20 minute segments. And so the idea is that those 15 to 20 minute segments can be tacked on to a home visit that is already going on, where all of those other things I mentioned are occurring. And, you know, because home visitors have this consistent relationship and frequent visits with clients, we think that that's a way that we can effectively get, you know, the material in our curriculum, you know, implemented.
So I know now there's a large scale of when intervention should take place, but can you give us some idea of what percentage of mothers are experiencing the stress or the depression where they should be seeking treatment?
So if you look at women who would meet criteria for major depression or clinical depression, you know, the research is showing that that's anywhere from 10 to 20% of women, right? So 1 in 10 to 1 in 5. Now that's not the end of the story though, and I think this is a really, really important point, again, as it relates to all of our work, right? If you take a look at the effects of clinical depression, major depression on parenting, we know that a mom who is clinically depressed, that has a lot of negative outcomes, not just for mom, but for the child, right? And as Sarah was saying, long term. We also know that moms who are not meeting criteria for major depression, but still have elevated symptoms of depression or elevated stress, that also affects mom's relationship with the child, right? So if we're focusing just on that 1 in 10 or 1 in 5, that 10 to 20%, we're missing a really, really large number of families who could benefit from a stress management intervention. And so, again, you know, the thought with our work is that we're trying to really target that much larger group of women. And, you know, our research and other people's research has shown that, you know, it's up to 50, 65% of women who are in home visiting programs who have elevated symptoms, but maybe don't meet criteria for major depression. And again, since we know that that also affects, you know, parenting, parent-child interaction, we really need to be thinking about interventions that are more universal around stress management and not targeting just that 10 to 20% who meet criteria.
And you've started some work now with dads, right?
Yeah, we're starting to do some work with dads. So, you know, as we've been doing mothers and babies work around the country for the last few years, when we do trainings, one of the questions we always get is, well, that's great you've got mothers and babies. What about fathers and babies? And I always say, yep, I agree. You know, there is definitely a role, obviously, for, you know, fathers. And we just recently received funding to actually develop, you know, what we're calling, you know, mothers and babies dads. I mean, we're going to give it a different name as it's developed, but really to develop a curriculum that could be used with dads to help them understand what's going on with mom in terms of her mental health, but also be promoting dad's mental health, because it's an important transition for mom as she's having, you know, a new baby, but it's also an important transition and a stressful transition for dad. So we are starting to embark on developing, you know, this curriculum, and I would say, you know, this time next year we should have it ready for pilot testing.
Great. Freestyle comments, either of you? for another question? Okay. Depesh, could you talk a little, so from the pediatrician perspective, when you, prescription or just the visit, some of the biggest surprises for you, you've been doing this for a long time, surprises that, particularly since you started focusing more on 2-gen work, I know you've been doing it for a long time, but some surprises or things that you've really discovered because of the fellowship or because of the work we're doing together now?
Sure. You know, as a pediatrician, I'm trained to think about children. In fact, arguably most of us in pediatrics say that we went into pediatrics because we don't want to do healthcare for icky adults. So, and you know, face it, we can do all sorts of fun things in pediatrics that we can't get away with in adult medicine. However, it's become increasingly evident in the field of pediatrics that it's not just the child, right? The child doesn't exist in isolation. And pediatrics has for some time now recognized that how much we need to think about parents as well. But here's the thing. There's still this focus on thinking of the parent merely as a vehicle to get to the child. And that's better than only thinking about the child, but it's still not really, it's kind of saying the parent has no value except as the vehicle to get to the child. On the flip side, right, you have programs that look only at adults. They might look at children, but they're often viewing children as an impediment to the adult. Like, oh, you can't get your associate's degree because you don't have child care. Okay, we'll fix that problem. Yeah, but what about the child? So one of the really eye-opening things about being in the Aspen Ascend Fellowship and working with these fantastic people and our other fellows was to recognize how much has been done and how much can be done. And it's really helped me push others in terms of Reach Out and Read, in terms of just general practice of pediatric care, health care, and so on, to say, but what about the parents? What are we doing to make sure that we're not just throwing parents a bone, but that we're actually caring about the parents as well? So for example, there was a early childhood center in South Madison that had been around for years and then ran into financial trouble and actually ended up closing. This was a big problem because this was really a major presence for many of the largely minority communities around where my clinic is and so on. Some folks, a new board formed, swept in, you know, and kind of took over the building. They were closed for a little bit, but they really did a complete renovation and started working on fundraising and so on. And the guy who kind of masterminded this came, you know, had heard about my work and asked if he could come visit me in my office. And so we sat and we talked for a while. And we were talking, and he's focusing on the children, and I looked at him and I said, you know what? You need to do something for parents here. Okay, you know as well as I that so much of what matters, children live in families. Okay, and we need to remind people of this. We need to remind policymakers of this. You can't transform the lives of children unless you transform the lives of their parents. Okay, so who am I to tell a parent that they should be reading to their child every night if they say, well, I can't do that because I'm not at home, I'm working my second job because that's how we make rent. You know, who am I to tell a parent, oh no, yeah, read, talk, sing, play, do all that stuff, and then they say, my diabetes is out of control because I don't have health insurance. I can't afford my medication. It's all I can do to just get through the evening, and you want me to do it? And this is the people who will tell me that. Most will just go and feel bad about, great, I'm being a terrible parent, and I've just made things worse by saying this. So I think that, so we talked about that, and they actually created this kind of learning institute is what they call it, and have started doing a monthly series for parents and arranging so that they can bring their children and their children are cared for during that time. And it's about topics like reading, and they had me come speak on reading and so on. And they're really trying to do what they can to support the lives of parents to help them better themselves, because when we do it for both, everyone benefits. Both generations benefit, and then we all benefit. There's really a marvelous efficiency to this. I don't think I would have had that opportunity had it been for the fellowship. The other opportunity that I got is, you know, honestly, okay, we're all here around the same theme, so I do get to interact with folks like Sarah and Darius all the time. I interact with funders less so, except when I'm going and groveling for money for one thing or another, but still it's a world I touch. But workforce development, housing, community colleges, okay, I don't touch those worlds as a pediatrician, And to be able to do that through so many of their Ascend Fellows really opened my eyes to all these other sectors that I just had no clue about and no idea about, and to really see the fantastic work that can be done. So it was really marvelous to be able to do that, and it's opened up thinking and enabled me to kind of start talking about that level of thinking in many other venues.
Great, thank you. Sarah, kind of the same question. You've been doing this work for a long time. What, 17 years? Yeah, a long time doing the work. Biggest aha moments for you, what you're excited about in the future from what you're learning, and then a little bit about the fellowship, if you would.
Sure. I mean, I'm very excited about trying to understand the biologic embedding of protective factors. That's really a new frame, and I think it makes a lot of sense. It fits with, we all say that we're strengths-based and that kind of thing, but we use the science of adversity to make our case, and I think it will be really important to try to figure that out. So that's probably the work that we're most excited about. But in terms of the fellowship, I think what I learned that was most impactful was how many people are really working on the same issues in really different ways from different sectors. We all have our hearts in the same place. And that was, invigorating and exciting, and sort of feels like there's this big safety net of us, all across the country, that aspect. But I also realized what a poor job my discipline has done in explaining what it is we're doing and why and what we've learned and what we don't know. So I have become somebody who does a lot of translation, a lot of speaking to groups of people from different sectors and different backgrounds to try to make sure that the science base that we all paid for, right? We all paid for it with our taxes, is something that everyone can understand. And it's really often the case that organizers invite me and then they say, okay, but not too much science detail. And I say, well, then you're going to have to ask somebody else, because that's what I'm here for. And on the back end, every single time people come up and say, thank you for giving us the real information. We didn't want the watered down version. We want to know what you know. I mean, if you can't say it in regular words, then figure out how to say it in regular words. But making it inaccessible to people is not helping any of us move forward. So I've been transformed myself into somebody who spends probably 20% of my time engaged in that translation. And when community partners want to know something, I can access the research base and help facilitate that conversation.
Darius, kind of the same thing, the big ahas for you, your work. And again, no one believes this because Darius looks like he's in his 20s, but you've been doing this work for how long?
15, 16 years.
Yeah, so big aha moments for you. What's the bright spot that you see in the future, and then the fellowship?
Sure. So, I think the big aha moment for me is that there's actually really good synergy between a lot of what we're doing in terms of stress management interventions and settings out there like home visiting programs and early childhood programs. I think a lot of our material is very simpatico with what programs are doing, and I think oftentimes, as an intervention developer, you worry about, is your intervention really going to fit in a setting? Is it going to work well? And I think one of the things that has been that aha for us is that home visiting programs, other settings where we've done our intervention, are recognizing, yeah, this is a need. This is a recognized need, and it's actually supportive of those settings. So I think that's the big aha. For us, the exciting work moving forward, you've heard me chat about this already, and I think one is the rollout in Florida. I mean, we are really, really excited about what this might look like, so I think that's one. The second is the dads piece. I think we're really, really excited about that because I think that, again, meets a recognized need. And then the third is to think about other settings beyond home visiting, where we might be able to take this work. And I think that's, sort of the next horizon for us. So that's exciting to think about. In terms of the fellowship, I said this at our lunch earlier. I'm a researcher, often in a room with other researchers, and I feel it's often a pretty stuffy, insular conversation that we have. And I think being with 20 other individuals. A couple of them are researchers, but folks from philanthropy, folks from state government. It's really been nice to share my ideas and be able to have folks from other sectors give me guidance on how to think about scaling up my work, about how we would integrate our interventions into different settings. And that's the sort of expertise that I don't always get from talking to other researchers.
Great. I'm going to step away from my moderator position for just a second and talk about the fellowship. So imagine me in Sarasota, Florida, wondering about some of the work you're doing and how impactful it could be, but to be able to connect with Aspen and Ascend and people like this and talk to a brain scientist or talk to a researcher and say, how do we ask the questions about outcomes and results and aspirations for families? How do we engage in a conversation where, how would you reach out to folks like this, if you're me, any other day, and actually get through someone to answer the phone? And Sarah's not the best at answering emails. The other ones are really good.
I'm just here to legitimize the book.
But so that access, and then the Aspen Institute and Ascend, any issue that you're thinking about, they're doing this work across the country. So Sarah Haight is my contact at Aspen, and I'll tell Sarah what I'm thinking, and I'm rambling and going on, and she'll say, John, stop for a second. Have you talked to the people in Tulsa, CAP in Tulsa? They're doing this work. They struggled with it. They've actually come up with a better solution. You might want to talk to them. And then they set up a structured phone call that lasts about 30 minutes with an agenda that makes sure we address the issues that I'm concerned about. And if you start to stray, they set up another call, or they connect you with someone else. We were the second cohort of fellows. In our first group, one of the fellows was Dr. Eduardo Padron from Miami-Dade College, who just won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. So they put a little pressure on the rest of us on what we're going to do next. I'm not going to set the bar quite there. I'd like to just make it at the Community Foundation for a few more years. That would be like my goal. But the Presidential Medal, these are the type of people that through the Aspen Institute and through Ascend, think of Walter Isaacson and Secretary Albright, and the access to people across the world that are doing incredible work. So it's been an amazing experience for me. I thank Roxie for the opportunity to attend and go there, because it was a real commitment of time. And we, I think, all got better about going to the fellowship. On the first flight out there, when you fly from wherever, you fly into Denver first, except for Sarah, who I'm sure drove. But I thought I saw other fellows on the plane. I never met any of them. Way too cool to talk to anybody, right? I'm just going to wait. When you get to Denver and now you're going to fly to Aspen, it's a much smaller plane. And where people are actually reading the same thing you're reading on the plane, because it's part of the required reading when you get there, there's a pretty good chance they're one of the other fellows. And then to go to our first session and the amazing things that happened from the first day of the fellowship right on through when we just wrapped up in December. And one other experience, Aspen was incredible. We went to Y, Maryland after that, and just talking about being aware of your environment. I'll never forget, they picked us up at the airport, and the Y campus is actually on a former plantation. And before we could start the class, Aspen had to stop and remind us that we were on a site where people had been bought and sold, that babies had been taken away from their families. So we spent 3 hours that night talking about that. So the experiences with this fellowship, in addition to these incredible folks, were thinking about things just a little bit differently for me. So it was an amazing experience. I want to leave plenty of time for questions. And
John, could I just throw one more thing in?
I don't know, run it by me first. Let me see. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, cool. Yeah, he's my handler, actually. So. One other thing that Aspen, that Ascend really did that I thought was absolutely fantastic, you know, a lot of these things I've talked about with Reach Out and Read, that it's not just about the book, right? That it's a way to do, it's an educational intervention, it's a way to look at relational health, it's a way to buffer toxic stress, et cetera, et cetera. A colleague and I wrote a paper trying to really say this isn't just about the book and reading, you know, that it's so much more. And we had a devil of a time trying to get any pediatric journal to accept it. The colleague is also a pediatrician. Oh, you know, it's too long, make it short. So we made it shorter. Well, we don't understand this. Well, because you made it too short, you know. Like, come on, people. And after getting rejected a couple of times, we just kind of gave up, and I said, I talked to the Ascend folks, and I said, I need to get this out into the world because people need to understand this bigger picture. And we talked through some options, and they said, why don't we just put it out as a publication? And I said, really? You can do that? And they said, yes, we'd be happy to do it. They may slightly regret it because I'm one of those nerds who also cares about typography, so I was sending back edits about the length of the dashes between things. But it came out beautifully. It came out in the form that it should have. And because Aspen sits between these different silos of the world, right? It has its fingers in so many different, places and disciplines. I guarantee you more people saw that report because of social media and whatnot on the first day it came out than ever would have seen it if it sat in even our best pediatric journal, because no one outside pediatrics, or very few people outside pediatrics, ever look at a pediatrics journal. And it was released for free. It's online. It's called The Elephant in the Clinic. You just type that into Google. It comes right up. And we designed it to be accessible to lay people and people from different disciplines. But they got it. They got the issue, and they didn't sit and no, it has to be this lens for this journal and this. They said, no, this information needs to be out there. And that was really a fantastic thing that they did.
Great. Maybe, Sarah, you could talk about your piece, same piece that you did together. So.
Sure. We have a paper called Two Open Windows that's about the full title is Two Open Windows, Paired Infant and Parent Neurobiologic Change. So it's about the changes that happen to the brain when you become a parent, if you're interested, and why thinking about the family unit when both the baby and the parents are in a sensitive period where lots of things are happening to their brain and body might be particularly important. And also, if you don't do it, it's a very vulnerable time.
Great. The Aspen Institute, in fact, today put out a case study of the work that we've done at the Community Foundation with many of you. That was released on their site today. So that came out today. Not coincidentally, we timed that to happen today. But that work, because of actually some donors that are with us today, things that we were able to try and be a little more risky about doing things, Aspen tracked that work, and then they released that report today. So copies on their website. Darius, you have something published on there, too, that it's older stuff. But you can find all of their work. I think it was something you wrote in Baltimore, though, that I think is on the site. It's in the resources side that you can find at the Aspen Institute site. Questions? I'm going to give time for questions. So I will repeat the question because we're actually being videotaped. So, yes, ma'am.
I just want to know if you have any specific work that you've done with teen parents and babies.
Any specific work done with teen parents and babies? Thank you, Luz. Someone's done something with teen parents and babies. Come on. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you that our intervention has been delivered to a lot of teen parents. In the work with home visiting programs, a lot of the clients in home visiting programs are younger mothers. And, the intervention, we've demonstrated works, with younger mothers as well as older mothers. I think one of the nice things, I mentioned earlier, we have, both our group modality and our one-on-one modality for our intervention. So we've seen some really nice examples when we're delivering our mothers and babies intervention in a group modality where some of the younger mothers, or as sometimes they're referred to, the less experienced mothers, can learn from some of the older mothers, in the group who might, have their second or third child. So, we've certainly done some work with teen mothers and think that the material is highly relevant for them.
Sarah, any difference in the brain?
I would love to know the answer to that question because some of the same regions that are impacted by stress and are important for parenting are still developing in teenagers and young adults. We have not yet convinced anyone to give us the money to do that project, but we have had that conversation. It's tricky to do adolescents because, for a number of reasons. But we're ready to do it.
Yeah, as a pediatrician, I always say it's difficult when you have the parent and the child both being your patient, which only happens in the teenage parent situation, really. Certainly the reach out and read intervention works with anyone, really. Any caregiver, so it can be a foster parent, it can be a grandparent who may be the primary caregiver, it can be an aunt, it can be a dad, it can be a mom of any age, and so on. And pointing out and doing these things where we try to help a parent understand what this thing we call dialogic reading. I don't use that phrase with families, but where it's a back and forth over the book with a squirmy toddler. How can you effectively engage them so that reading doesn't become something that's forgotten in the toddler months and so on? Those are actually applicable across all of these lines.
Thank you. Other questions? Catherine.
Yeah, so our intervention is, so the question is whether we've thought about our intervention within healthy families, which is a child abuse and neglect prevention model. So what I say about our intervention is that Mothers and Babies is home visiting model agnostic, meaning it can be integrated into different models, right? It is not something that was developed to be specifically integrated into Healthy Start or Parents as Teachers. So we actually in Illinois, where I'm based, the majority of programs there are using the Healthy Families model, and we're integrating our intervention into those programs.
So you're going to do that in Florida too?
Sure. We can talk.
Philip.
Has your work touched on multilingual families? What have you discovered or learned?
I think that's going to be a yes for all of us. So I did describe we're doing some work with about 70% recent immigrants from Mexico. So the vast majority of those families are Spanish speaking. And many of them are bilingual families. And as I've said, they've got a lot of protective factors. So it does look to be, there's a lot of positive things happening there. Also, obviously, some additional adaptations for kids as they learn 2 languages in their new host country.
Reach Out and Read has always been committed to working with families across various languages because it's not effective for us to hand a book in English to a family that may not speak English. Because here's what will happen. That book will sit at home on a shelf. A book on a shelf is nothing more than an ornament. It doesn't do anything. The magic of a book doesn't happen until it's open in the laps of an adult and a child that are reading it together. So sometimes we have families that say, I want the English book because I want my child to learn English because I don't want them to struggle like I do. Well, here's the thing. The moment they enter school, even if they're completely in, say, a Spanish language household or whatever, the moment they enter school, within months, they pick up English so quickly and so rapidly and so fluently. The current generations of immigrants, there's actually excellent research that shows that they are actually assimilating into language and other culture within one generation, which was actually not true previously. In Wisconsin, there were actually some German populations that spoke only German for about 5, 6 generations and did not assimilate in for a long time back in the 1800s. So we give out books like this one. I have this board book here. It's part of the Baby Faces series, and it's in Spanish, because we want the family to feel comfortable with this book. We want them to feel comfortable opening it and sharing it with their young child. Books to Reach Out and Read through like the National Center are available in 24 languages, and we have sources for other ones that are less common. In Wisconsin, we have a large Hmong Southeast Asian population. We've actually found some, not tons, but some board books and so on in Hmong. And there's even places, the Bellevue Clinic at New York University has some, they serve like families that speak like 200 different languages amongst their population. They've found some languages that are so unusual that you cannot find board books or any kind of children's book in. They have sat there and painstakingly, just because they want to, translated each line and pasted it into the book so these families would have a book, and so on.
And Darius, you're in English and Spanish and just translating now into...
Yeah, I mean, we do our intervention in English and Spanish. We've translated our materials, or they're being translated now into Creole. The one thing I'll say, and I don't want this to be a wet blanket statement, but I think it's important to throw out that, especially for me, as an intervention researcher, when we're talking about, different languages and different cultures, it's not just translating our material into a different language. It's also, doing cultural adaptation of the material to make sure that it's not just the language that resonates, but the material is also going to resonate. So, we have, the intention of going down that road with, cultural adaptation of our intervention, but we want to be very thoughtful and deliberate in doing that and not just say, let's translate it into 14 different languages, because that might be effective, but we want to make sure that it's going to be, culturally resonant as well.
Other questions? Philip?
Same question about the printed word and technology-assisted reading.
So the question is about technology, and I assume you're referring to like digital media or ebooks and so on? Sure, okay. This comes up a lot, and there's a variety of ways to look at this. To a certain extent, text is text. Okay, you can look at text on a printed page, you can look at text on a screen, and you're still having to do that work of decoding the text that's there. Whether it's a screen or not probably doesn't matter too much if it's simply looking at the text itself. There's some question about whether the tactile nature of a book, about turning pages, matters. It probably does somewhat in children of certain ages. It all depends, right? Are they doing other things with their hands and all? It probably varies a lot from child to child. Having said that, I think there's some real dangers with screen media for ebooks and all, and here's the dangers. One is that a lot of ebooks, first of all, if they don't have high quality screens, if you're looking at picture books, you're losing the beautiful visuals, which are really so integral and part of the book as much as the text. So that's one thing. Number two is that a lot of these ebooks are enhanced, meaning that you touch a word and a definition pops up. Or you touch this part of the picture, like the bird and the bird tweets or something, which it wouldn't do that in the paper book, obviously. So some parents say, oh, this is great, this is better than a paper book because it has these sorts of connections and it gives you this information. Well, guess what? It's a massive distraction. And the kid sits there hitting everything just to figure out which ones will make the device do something. And they're not actually spending time taking in the pictures, you know, at an older age, going through the text and so on. So it can be actually massively distracting to have these bells and whistles and connections and so on. And the last thing, which I think is probably the biggest issue, most people are not getting dedicated e-readers that only do books and nothing else. Most people are using an iPad or something like that that has, I mean, even the Amazon Kindle series, like so many of the Kindles are basically tablet devices that let you browse and do all sorts of things. Unless you are absolutely scrupulous as a parent, and almost no parent is able to successfully do this, the child at a young age knows that not only can you read a lovely picture book on this device, you can also play Angry Birds. And Angry Birds offers stimulation, feedback, noise, visuals, all that stuff. It is very enticing. Video games are designed to be enticing, especially to young brains. So what happens is the child is going to whine and demand that they want the Angry Birds and not the book, whereas the book is not going to play Angry Birds no matter how hard you try, right? So there's this displacement effect that can happen, that you give up as a parent because you're sick of fighting your child every single time because they want the other thing on there, and that the book gets forgotten and the reading gets forgotten. Having said that, if somebody says to me, I have our iPad, we load 200 picture books on it and we take it everywhere we go and we only use it for picture books, but it means I can carry 200 books and not have a stack this high with us, hey, fantastic. That is better, far better than no book. There's just a few caveats that we need to be really careful with.
Philip, I'm going to give you one more, and then this is your probation right now. Yes.
In terms of brain and biology, does it matter in terms of its development on the parent side or the child and the child's, how trusted the relationship is, so the parent nurturing, interacting with another child, not their own child, is there a difference in the parent and in the way the parent is changing? And the same thing with the child, if it's a teacher or another adult in the child's life.
Sure. So with regard to the parent, it is specific to their own children. There are certainly baby people, right? There are people who would probably have very responsive neurobiology to lots of different kids. I would love actually to study that at some point, but the change that happens is specific to a child you're invested in. I don't think that it's biologic, but we don't actually know that. We've only looked at biologic parents. I think it's really the time and investment in the child. But that is specific. Now, for kids, we know that they can form multiple important relationships, and that all of those relationships have benefits for them. One of the most impactful findings is that any adult that the child perceives to be consistently and reliably available to them can serve a critical protective role. And that could be a teacher, it could be a coach, it could be a neighbor, doesn't have to be living in the home, and does not have to be related to the child. So I often conclude events by saying we can all be that adult for at least one child. But, you know, consistency, what you're hearing, consistency, availability, those are the key sort of features. And it's not about hours. It can be, you know, an hour a day, whatever. So they can certainly have multiple important relationships. And like we say about friendships, having at least one is the key thing. So having at least one friend is really important for development. Having at least one adult that you can count on seems to be really the critical thing. And of course, multiple relationships have multiple benefits.
Great. And just to throw in on that, the sociologist Yuri Bronfenbrenner was once asked, of all the research out there and all, what matters? What's the intervention that makes the biggest difference? And he thought for a moment, and he said, well, that child needs an adult who's absolutely crazy about them. And that's really, he said, that's what it all boils down to, you know, which is exactly what you're saying here. That social connection matters just so critically, and we see this difference clinically in the exam room. Children who have been moved in and out of foster care over and over, they've learned not to trust the next person who says, I'm here to care for you because the last 7 people said that, and so on.
And that's important across the whole developmental window and probably across adulthood, right? So having that key, that's not just about babies. Adolescents need an adult who's consistently, reliably supportive of them.
Any wrap up from the panel? I'm going to do one more numbers thing here. When we started the campaign for grade level reading work in Sarasota, one of the things Roxie asked us to do is go back and look, talking about the FCAT then in 2013, how many kids, we're talking 71% of the kids were reading at grade level in Sarasota. We should be thrilled about that. That's the 3rd best in the state of Florida. That's very exciting. But how many kids failed the FCAT, the group that we want to try to get better? It really came down to a relatively small number. 886 kids in 2013 failed the FCAT. That's not a whole lot of kids when we talk about interventions and things we could do to make it better. How many babies were born in Sarasota last year? Well, you told me that today. I know you know that. Not you, Sean, someone else. Anybody else want to guess? Exactly, 3,000. So when we put that into perspective, we're talking about making some real big change here. This is not an insurmountable problem. It's 3,000 kids and their families that we really want to make sure are getting the best care by all of us in our community to take these kids on and their families and make sure they're successful. It is not 400,000 people. It's really not that much to do. We have agencies that are doing great work like this. We have to support those agencies. We have to figure out where the gaps are. We have to figure out where the overlaps are. This is not that hard if we get smart people around the table and agree on the outcomes we want to achieve. When I heard that number today, Sean, I was really surprised. And where are most of those babies born? Not Sean. Sarasota Memorial Hospital, right? It's just right here. We know where it is. It's not 100 places we have to figure out. They're mostly being born right there. There's only 3,000 of them. We can do this. So, last thoughts from you?
Sorry, same for Manatee, right?
I don't know the number and if it's 3,000 or not, so I'm just having the number. Anybody from Manatee know, is it 3,000?
It's more. It's a
A
little higher than 3,000.
little higher than 3,000? Yeah, that's too hard. We can't take that on. Just too much. No, we can only do 3,000%.
John gets tapped out after the numbers get too big. So,
right,
yeah.
3,000.
Yeah. In summary, I really would just like to say that there's so much that can be done, and I think what you're seeing here is a reflection of the kind of different levels of things that go on. I mean, Sarah's work, I've talked about that Open Windows paper over and over and over to people to help them see, you know, there is such a major biological basis, for what we talk about when we work with parents and about parenting and skill building, and really taking advantage of these periods in life. And people are really this enthralled when they hear it. What Darius is talking about, I think of as sort of this mid-level intervention, right? Folks who need a bit more, not tons more, but they need somewhat more. Reach out and read hits everyone, ideally. So it's almost like thinking of different nets, and what's the net that we can scale to everyone? What's the net that we need to be smaller because it's a little more intensive and more expensive? And what's the net that's the treatment net that's really intensive and really expensive? Our world largely looks at those treatment nets, trauma-informed care, therapy, all those sorts of things. We can't scale that to everyone. So when you think about those nets, all of them are necessary, but none of them on their own are sufficient. And so we need to think about this really from a public health perspective of multi-level interventions.
That was a long final thought.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go shorter. I know you can. I'm gonna go shorter. I'm gonna say start as early as possible. The family is the unit, and never give up on anyone.
I feel like that should be the final thought. But
99-year-olds should stop smoking and go out for a walk.
I guess the one thing I would close with is if a parent is not emotionally healthy, if there is some concern about mental health, that is a barrier to that parenting. We've talked a lot about that. It's also a barrier to other things, and this is a point that I've made throughout my time here in Sarasota. If a mom is interested in getting her GED, if mom is interested in finding a different job, mental health is also a barrier to achieving success in those areas as well. So there's many reasons that we need to be attentive to emotional health for these 3,000 plus children and their families.
Great, thank you. Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Roxie, for Dr. Shelley.